Welcome to the Forum, your modern-day coffee house, where ideas can be birthed, exchanged, and wrestled with. We celebrate questions, conversation, and reason as powerful tools to enlighten hearts and transform minds, shaping a new generation of thinkers, innovators, and pioneers. We're glad you're here, so pull up a chair and let's begin.
Hello, good evening, everyone. So if this is your first time or you're a returning visitor, myself and the rest of the Q team would like to extend a warm welcome to the Forum at Q. The Forum is a space for people who want to think, question, and explore the world beyond the headlines. Every week, we dive into a different idea, from philosophy and politics to psychology, culture, and the future. Now, if you'd like to stay in the loop with upcoming topics, talks, and content, you can just scan the QR code on the posters around the room and subscribe that way. You can also find links on our YouTube and social media platforms. Now today, we're turning our attention to one of the most urgent and fascinating questions of our time: life after AI. Not just what it's doing to our jobs or news feeds, but what it's doing to us, to our thinking, our relationships, our values, and our future. Now, I have to be honest, I absolutely love AI. It is currently helping me redecorate my house. Not one interior designer bill has to be paid. It's just me, a glass of red, and ChatGPT. From color palettes, to cushions, to furniture layouts, it's helping me turn my house into a show home. However, I am also aware of both its real and potential dangers, and therefore ask myself, am I being naive or simply recognizing the contrast that exists with most things in life? The question is then, what happens next? Will AI be a benevolent force, helping us to cure disease, rethink education, and help us solve some of the most pressing issues faced by our species? Or could it quietly reshape the way humans work, from our beliefs, behavior, and choices in ways we don't yet fully see or understand? Will it make us more human or less? These aren't just technical questions. They're deeply ethical, philosophical, and even spiritual ones. And that's exactly why we are here. So, to help us explore them, we're joined by technologist Rob Hornby, someone who's spent years helping people and organizations make sense of the digital world. So whether you're AI curious, AI concerned, or just here for the thought experiment, please put your hands together and join me in welcoming Rob Hornby to the stage.
Thank you. They were very good questions, weren't they? It's a shame I'm not really answering any of them. I hope you enjoy the talk. It was written by ChatGPT. It's very sympathetic to AI. For anyone who hasn't met me or doesn't know me, I'm the co-CEO of one of the global consultancy firms, but I am a technologist by background. And in firms like ours, it's only very recent that someone with a technical background could actually end up as one of the CEOs. It's a sign of the times, all tied up really with the subject we're talking about. And I've also begun to get some of my first party invites as well. So that's nice. I've actually come out of coding retirement. I gave up coding when I was about 30, and I've just come out of retirement in my early 50s. And the reason for it is I just became very frustrated with the big cloud of AI nonsense that I decided that I wanted to really, really look under the lid. And I've actually really enjoyed it. I've built myself a neural network. So I've seen into the heart of the beast. And I think if people did the same, we'd have a lot less being said, but it would probably be a little bit better quality. So, for anyone who was not at my talk a year or so ago, which I think is no one, but just in case there is someone, a very quick history of AI. So if you're British, you will say that AI was invented at Manchester University in 1951. And if you're American, you'll say it was invented at Carnegie Mellon University in 1956. But whichever you choose, it was the 1950s. And there's quite a lot of talk about giving the impression that AI was invented in 2022, which was very much not the case. And in fact, the original definition of AI was provided by Stanford professor John McCarthy in 1955, and he said that AI is the science and engineering of making intelligent machines. I think he's wrong, incidentally, but it was 1955 and it was pretty ahead of its time, so a pretty amazing thing to have said, whether with the benefit of decades of the passage of time, I still think it's right. I look for lots of really fancy definitions by extremely eminent scientists, but I found the one I liked was actually in the Webster's Dictionary, and it's this: artificial intelligence is the capability of a machine to imitate intelligent human behavior. And just note that word imitate, because we're going to come back to it. So generative AI is where all the hype is, and that did come out in 2022, and people talk about it as if it's a whole new species of technology, but actually it isn't. It's just another branch of traditional machine learning, which goes right back to the 1950s. But it does represent a very big technical advance, and that means it can do something which previous forms of AI have not been able to do. It can produce novel output in multi-channel. It can create images, it can write poems. You know this. We've got very comfortable with this idea. But it was a pretty big breakthrough, and it did require a whole different type of neural network. And I've put it to good use by creating this very attractive picture of Aristotle as a robot, smiling. It did take me more than an hour to make it do this, but it can do things like that. And actually, there's no pictures. If you forget the robot part, there's no pictures of Aristotle smiling until now. So you're welcome. So generative AI has kind of changed the game. It's made everyone very interested in AI again, because there's something called the AI winter, which you don't hear very much about, but there were decades when AI made almost no progress whatsoever, which is hard to believe at the moment. Of course, there's speculation occasionally that we're going to go into another one of those, but there was lots of rapid progress, and then a big plateau, and then really generative AI. And it's led to a great deal of speculation. Some of the most recent speculation is from Dario Amodi, who's the CEO of Anthropic, the provider of Claude for for anyone who's used Claude. It's a ChatGPT rival. It's actually my favorite of the models. But he has predicted that within 5 years, half of all entry-level white-collar jobs will have been replaced with AI. And that's a potentially worrying statistic. It captured a lot of headlines. But if you look a bit deeper, you find other pieces of information that seem to contradict that kind of statement. So in a survey that was done this year, 42% of companies trying to adopt AI had abandoned their project before it ever went live. Almost half. Also, some research which involved Microsoft, who are a big player in the AI field, concluded, and this is just a quote taken from the abstract of the research paper, it noted that generative AI has a tendency for automation to make easy tasks easier and hard tasks harder. That doesn't sound like an entirely good thing to me, and that's a very recent paper. So we seem to have some quite contradictory information out there all at the same time. So the question is, are the robots really coming, or are they going to trip over their own power cord before they arrive? And I'm going to try and give something of an answer to that using what might, on the face of it, seem like a very unusual perspective to start from. I'm going to use some of the philosophy of our friend Aristotle. Now, you might protest with some justification that Aristotle lived 2,300 years before the first computer, and therefore his relevance could be in a bit of question. However, he did make some incredibly astute and enduring observations about people. And that's what I think is very instructive as we try and figure out what's going to happen. Sometimes we need to go backwards before we can go forwards. So, I've got the clicker. Click it. I've learned how to click now. There we go. 2 clicks. If you're ever here with the clicker. I tried the 1-click method last time I was here. It didn't work as well. So, Aristotle, don't be put off by this slide. Aristotle proposed 3 types of knowledge and reasoning. And this is, because I suspect you'll be rushing to buy this afterwards, this is book 6 of his Nicomachean Ethics, which is a book about human flourishing. So the Nicomachean Ethics thing sounds a bit esoteric, but we talk about human flourishing all the time. And that is 2,500 years old. That comes from Aristotle. Just in brief, and then I'm going to unpack them, so don't worry if this isn't absolutely clear, because it will be very slightly less unclear soon. 3 types of knowledge. Episteme is basically science. Techn is basically craft or skill. And Phronesis is basically practical wisdom. So, I'm going to unpack them, and I'm hoping that you will see, as I do that, how this indicates different kinds of human activity, and it's possible to think about how good AI is at doing those different types of things, which gives us a clue to anticipating the future. let's start simple. Episteme is basically science. It includes maths, it includes logic. You could argue that it includes some forms of philosophy. Episteme can only be discovered. It can't be created. So we have a friend who was staying with us in London, and she brought us back a key ring from the Science Museum, and we said, who is this on the key ring? It had a figure on it. She said, you know, it's that guy who invented the monkey. She has small children, she's a bit frazzled, but basically it was a picture of Darwin. But the thing is, you don't invent monkeys, you discover them. And episteme is all about the discovery of things that already exist. And actually, AI has made some huge breakthroughs in this field in the last 12 months. Something called Alpha Evolve, which was developed by Google DeepMind, was announced in May of this year, and it's so good at maths that it immediately improved an algorithm that humans had been unable to improve over the last 55 years. And then there's also IBM's AI Hilbert, which I think is quite a cute name. It's actually named after a famous scientist. But it's been taking data from experiments, and it's been validating that data against existing scientific theories. It's also been rediscovering scientific laws. We already know, but it doesn't. And it's been finding them out again for itself in an accelerated fashion. But so far, these platforms have not made a genuinely unique discovery. So far, they're just helping scientists make the breakthroughs. But I don't see any reason in theory why they couldn't ultimately do the original discovery themselves, particularly in perhaps a decade's time when we almost certainly will have some form of quantum computing and everything will just kick up to a new gear. I think when we get that, it'll be quite possible for brand new scientific discovery to be done by machines. But at the moment, they're like a super powerful scientific assistant. But the things that they were doing that I've just described didn't exist a year ago. So that's the speed that the field is moving on. And just while I'm on the subject of breakthroughs, I just wanted to say something about creativity, because I know some of you, I know it's a very creative crowd. And of course, you'll be aware there's a big outcry amongst some artists and performers and creative people. Now, you've already seen it be creative with the smiling Aristotle. And it's true that AI can produce creative outcomes. It uses a range of technologies, and just in case there's any geeks amongst you, I'm talking about transformers, diffusion models, GANs, and variational autoencoders. That's all the machinery that AI uses to create novel outcomes, either images or text or something else. Within the boundaries of those technologies and the data that it's been trained on, AI platforms have been shown to be as creative as a human, in some cases more creative than a human. But the thing with human creativity is that humans do not stay inside their boundaries. If you think about people who've really advanced our knowledge, a lot of what they said was essentially incomprehensible at first. I'm thinking of people like Nietzsche, Kant, Derrida. I think I mentioned Kant earlier. He wrote a book, large sections of which couldn't be understood by anyone, so he rewrote it, but they said they still had no idea what he was talking about. So that was pretty awesome. And of course, we have people like Einstein, who famously imagined himself riding on a beam of light in order to create the theory of relativity. So human creativity at times is on the edge of madness. And actually that's a place that AI can't go. It either stays inside its boundaries, where it can be creative, but not in a breakthrough sense, or it breaks through its boundaries and usually becomes pretty incomprehensible in ways that don't lead to an advance of knowledge. So, for now, true, groundbreaking creativity is still very much the province of humans. I personally don't think that will change, but even if it did, it is my personal opinion. I used to do this, didn't I? I used to do an opinion warning. It's my personal opinion that genuine creativity reflects our experiences as humans, our suffering, our joy, our sense of beauty, our moments of transcendence. AI doesn't have any of those capabilities, and I'll come on to talk later about why I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. In summary, as I say to some of my journalist friends, unless your journalism is really, really bad, you don't have to worry. Doesn't seem to reassure them. So that's the world of episteme and scientific discovery and a little bit of a detour about AI creativity. Let me move on to Techn. So Techn, as I mentioned, is to do with know-how, it's to do with craft, it's to do with skill. This is about creating something that would not have existed otherwise. And it's really broad. It could be an idea, it could be an object, it could be a performance. If you imagine performing a rock concert, making a cup of tea, or even issuing a parking ticket, this is all in the realm of Techn. Techn, by the way, is the word from which we get technique. So maybe that's helpful in just trying to get a sense of what the word means. And so what is AI doing in this space? And the answer is a lot. This is AI's natural habitat. AI is providing optimization of some traditional crafts, like ceramic glazing, woodworking, joint design, metalwork processes. It can actually optimize surgical techniques. It can develop bespoke treatment plans in the medical field. It's a speech writer, a marketing copy assistant, and a legal brief drafter. It can enhance bridge building. It can optimize urban space planning. It can help farmers with crop rotation. And it'll probably replace most routine coding computer coding within the next 5 years, probably the next 2. Now, as you know, if you've tried it, it doesn't do any of these things perfectly at the moment, but this is the worst it's ever going to be, and it's getting better at a rate of knots. But it does have some really important limitations at the moment. The first is, if it's trying to automate a really complicated task, it can do that for about an hour before things start going wrong, by which I mean more than 50% wrong. And if you think about your job and you imagine getting things 50% wrong, it's possible someone might say something. So currently, AI is having difficulty orchestrating itself in complex tasks for a long time. It's really, really good at doing things for 10 minutes. And I've met some people like that. But the thing that's different is that time is doubling every 7 months. And that means in 2 years, it should be able to automate a whole day's work, still with this 50% threshold, so not quite good enough. But in 2 or 3 years, we can imagine that these platforms might be able to take on something that looks like an actual job. But it's not 3 days away, or 3 weeks away, or 3 months away. It's a few years away. It also doesn't apply to everything. There's something called Moravec's paradox. I'll read it to you. It's not the super friendly definition that you might be looking for. It says, high-level reasoning requires very little computation, but low-level sensory motor skills require enormous computational resources. What does it mean? Software's miles ahead of hardware. It's really hard to make robotics efficient from an energy perspective, and it's really hard to give robots fine motor skills in a general way. They can do very specific things. And this is why, in our local Thai restaurant, there's an automated tray stand on wheels. And basically, it scoots about, because it's quite a big restaurant, it scoops about, avoiding tables, chairs, dogs, people, and it goes to different places, and the waiting staff put trays of collected up crockery and so on onto it, and it scoots back to the kitchen. But it can't pick up the items for itself, and it's not going to be able to do that for the foreseeable future, because even if you could design it to do it, it would take too much power, and you'd be charging it up every half an hour. This means some jobs, like plumbing, are probably going to go up in value. Now, electricians almost certainly going down in value. Electricians just the same as plumbers, because if you think about what's involved, you have to get into the right place, you've got to understand what's going on, it's fiddly. In the case of plumbers, you've got, all sorts of pipe work in awkward places. That's just not going to be automated. And what's probably going to happen as a result is the value of some brain-orientated jobs is going to go down, or they're going to be automated. And some of the jobs that we've tended to rank lower in terms of value to the economy are actually going to rise in value because they're just inaccessible to AI. And then just to say that there's a bunch of things that are still in this Techn space, but they just require the human touch. Some parts of sales, some parts of social care, change management, artistic performance, some forms of advice. This domain will definitely shrink. There'll be some parts of all these things that AI can do, but in the end, humans are going to want to deal with humans for certain types of things, and that's not going to change. I'll come back to that. We also need to remember that AI is still fallible, and the impression is given that that's an engineering problem that's just about to be solved. It's not. Part of the way that generative AI is designed means hallucinations are always going to be a feature of those platforms. It's something we'll have to live with. Of course, we live with it in the context of each other. But those problems are not going to be solved entirely by AI. And of course, we've also seen that AI reflects our bias because it's using our data. And I think some attempts are being made to improve that. But in the end, they operate disturbingly like us in all our good and bad. And I'll come back onto that as well. So what's going to happen in the Techn space? I think you can expect to see rapid advances in the automation of particularly mental tasks, slower advances in robotics, because some of the big players like NVIDIA have got involved and started investing a lot of money. We'll probably see the disappearance of some categories of job. But then we'll see the emergence of new categories, some of which we don't even know what they are today. And you say, well, why do you say that? Well, just think about the internet. So the internet destroyed whole industries that were based on information friction. So traditional travel agents have shrunk as a sector, but the internet created 30 million web designer jobs. Now, generative AI is just about to take most of those jobs, but all of a sudden we've got prompt engineering as a whole new domain. And I've seen some of these complicated prompts that actually instruct the AI platforms what to do. Some of them are pages and pages long, and they include code, because these models are very complex, and it's a real skill to be able to instruct it in depth as to what you want it to do. That job category simply didn't exist 2 years ago. The Industrial Revolution and the internet both created more jobs than they destroyed. I personally don't see any reason why the AI revolution needs to be different to that. I was actually quoted in the Times a couple of weeks ago for saying that because it's so against the current sort of narrative. But why should it be that there's a net reduction in jobs for humans? We just haven't had the imagination to know what's coming. All we can see is the types of jobs that might be going. And if history is a predictor, and it's not always, but if history is a predictor, AI could easily be a job creator and not a job destroyer. There's almost certainly going to be a big upheaval, and I'm not suggesting that it's not going to be without winners and losers, but it could be that we end up with more employment opportunities than we ever had. So, Techn, is the big habitat of AI. What about phronesis? What about phronesis? I hear you say. Well, this is best understood as practical wisdom, as I mentioned. Practical because this type of thinking and reasoning is done in a real-world setting. Wisdom because it's more than just knowledge. And my favorite definition of phronesis or practical wisdom is this: doing the right thing to the right person in the right amount at the right time for the right end and in the right way. Think of a judge applying a general law to a very specific circumstance, which they do all the time. They contextualize the situation. That's why sometimes they're explaining their decision for hours. Think about a doctor who is trading off someone who's very sick with a treatment that's very risky. I even thought about Rachel Reeves, and that's not something that I do on a regular basis, although I have met her a couple of times. She's trying to balance the books, and actually she can't. She's trying to trade off the interests of different stakeholders in a situation where there isn't enough to go round. And we saw the effect on her just the other day. The difference between phronesis and the other categories of episteme and techne, according to Aristotle, is that in order to enact this kind of reasoning, you need empathy, you need character, you need experience, you need a sense of timing, you need the ability to grasp the big picture and the particulars of the case at the same time. And actually, the current forms of AI we have on offer can't do any of those things. AI can help a judge understand precedents that have gone before, although they famously have historically made up cases that didn't exist. But they can't act as a judge or a member of a jury to weigh the evidence. AI can advise on a medical diagnosis and a treatment plan, but they can't make the life and death decision in the circumstances presented by a real-world situation. Almost certainly, AI helped Rachel Reeves do some modeling of the economy, but AI can't decide what to do about it. And you say, well, why not? Well, you might have heard the term artificial general intelligence, AGI, and this constant suggestion that we're right on the threshold of AI overtaking human intelligence. The problem is that the kind of intelligence that's being referred to is our cognitive reasoning. It's about 10% of what the brain is doing at any one time. AI does not have emotions, instincts, generalized embodiment. It has no morality, it has no long-term memory, and it's not conscious. The brain is dealing with all those things in us. Which is why it's not surprising that so-called neuromorphic computers that are specifically designed to mimic the brain, actually the world's biggest one is currently in Manchester. It's called Spinnaker. It's the absolute state of the art. It has 1% of the number of simulated neurons that are in the human brain. And the person who leads it, it's very impressive, says we're still a long way from full brain emulation, but we can learn a lot from modeling the parts. So when people talk about AGI, they're talking about the ability of AI to mimic about 10% of what we do. And it turns out the other 90% is quite important for a lot of things we do. And I don't think this is really going to change, because no one's working on this stuff. Why would they? Do we actually even want AI that's capable of all those things? And even if we did, some of these things are very hard. We don't understand our own consciousness, and therefore, how can we create artificial consciousness, just as an example? So what does that mean? It means that this whole realm of phronesis is the realm of humans, and it's going to be for at least a decade. It also means humans need to stay in charge of any complex decisions of consequence, because AI is simply not equipped to be able to take decisions like that. Because AI uses speech patterns and plays them back to us like an act of ventriloquism, our brains are very prone to treat them like synthetic humans, if you like. But they're not. And my current favorite phrase is, there's no I in AI. There's no actual person there. It's an illusion. It's an illusion. And in fact, Derrida, who wrote about what he calls an illusion of presence, he was talking about the lasting effects of marks in culture. But he coined this phrase a hauntology, something that appears to be there but is not actually there. And the truth is that the ghost in the machine is actually us. It's all our data, it's all our language patterns, but the platform itself is just playing them back in very advanced and clever and powerful ways. But what we're getting is basically us. Shannon Vallas suggests that it's like looking in a mirror and seeing humanity reflected back to us, somewhat distorted and exaggerated in places, and I think she is right. This means we not only need a human in the loop, we need humans to design the loop, to own the loop. We basically need human leadership for the foreseeable future, because there's no I in AI. And I've been doing, because I'm very, very weird, I've got this lab thing involving quite a powerful computer, but it's not very big. It's the size of a 2-slice toaster, and now it is predictably talked about in our house as the toaster. And so when I slip upstairs on the pretext of doing an email and I'm still there for 25 minutes, I hear from downstairs, "Are you messing about with that toaster?" And the answer is typically yes. But one of the things I've been doing with the toaster, I've got 20-odd large language models, and I've been asking them questions about personhood and consciousness. And with the exception of 2 of the models, none of them are willing to say that they could be held responsible for anything. They basically said, it's those developers. Yeah, if I do anything, it's them. And so the models themselves are not claiming to have moral capacity or be able to take moral responsibility, but they are clever enough to say who should be held responsible. It's not them. So what does this mean for the future? Well, contrary to a lot of what we hear, I don't believe that the post-AI future is somehow inevitable and can't be influenced by us. As far as I can see, the visions of a tech utopia, this was drawn by AI. I asked it for a utopia, that's the light color, and a dystopia, and then I asked it to do the diagonal line. And then I had to fix it because it didn't draw it in the right place. But not too bad. There's no feasible path to a technology utopia where AI has solved all disease, has provided resources aplenty for everyone, has made us immortal, allows us to be uploaded digitally to last forever. To be honest, I'm not sure I could think of anything worse. There's no, even if that's something we wanted, and I suspect if we thought about it carefully, we wouldn't, but even if we did, there's no path from here to that place that's technically feasible in any way whatsoever. It's pure speculation. It's much more science fiction than it is science. And yet, it's got a lot of airtime in the media. Equally, I don't think we're necessarily heading for any kind of dystopia. Because if we look at the other technical upheavals, and I've mentioned the Industrial Revolution and I've mentioned the internet, they haven't led to a dystopian situation. There are some features of dystopia, and there are probably some features of utopia. But I think we're in for a messy middle way, because that just seems to be what humans create. We make huge mistakes, some of them very serious, and yet we somewhat learn from them, and we create some mess and some progress, and we adapt and continue. I agree with Kevin Kelly, who's the co-founder of Wired magazine, who talks about protopia. And he says, protopia is a state or society that's progressively improving in small and realistic ways, rather than aiming for an unattainable perfect world or fearing collapse. But he wasn't the first person to talk about a middle way. In books 1 and 2 of the Nicomachean Ethics, and he thought you only had to buy book 6, but now you're going to have to add books 1 and 2 to your list. He talks about how to live with purpose, Aristotle, and he talks about how to maximize human flourishing, and he suggests that the way to do it lies always between extremes. He calls it the doctrine of the mean. And so in closing, and with Aristotle, I'd encourage all of us to embrace the inevitable AI revolution, but to do it with proportionality, sound judgment, the exercise of our own agency, with practical wisdom, in such a way as we demand the future that we actually want, a future that ultimately maximizes human flourishing. Aristotle said it first, and I think it's a voice we could do with today. Thank you very much. I'm very, very happy to take some questions, because I don't know if you know this, but I know everything about AI. So there's nothing you can ask me that I don't know, except for the 3 or 4 first questions. And then the ones after that.
I have a question. Thank you. I like that you're so measured and that you tell me things I didn't know. As someone who feels the need to be up to date in my work context, how do you stay up to date? So like you said, that right now it can do great things for 10 minutes, but maybe 7 months from now it'll go up to 20. Yeah. As an everyday person, other than you coming back every 3 months and updating us, how do you stay informed and up to date with what's happening?
Yeah, so it's a really good question, because so much of what is being written is unhelpful. And so much of what's been written, when you've looked under the covers, you know can't be true. So it's a difficult question. I've found some sources that I trust. Some of them are on Substack, which of course the forum's on Substack. So there are some places you can subscribe there. There are some, I would say The Economist is very good at understandable, measured explanations of things. There's 1 or 2 journalists who I like. John Thornhill at the FT, I think, is very good. So you have to find your people. And I think if you dial into them and you just watch the sources of the debate, that's normally enough to ground you in what's actually going on. Because if you don't do that and find your people that you trust, I think on what basis do most people form a judgment? It's actually really difficult. And when people are making statements because they're trying to do fundraising or they're trying to get publicity, this is the reason AGI is in the news every 6 weeks, they're doing it for cynical purposes. And of course, we all bear the consequences in being anxious about what's going to happen. So it's a really, really good question. Find your 5 people.
I've got one.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. It's very interesting. If you wanted to invest money in AI, where would you target it? So I'm thinking, would you invest in data centers? Would you invest in electrical suppliers? Also thinking back to the dot-com era, there was a great speculation at the time as to who would make the money. Would it be the browser developers, etc.? So when it comes to AI, say you had £10,000 to invest, where would you put it?
Right, so other opinions are available other than the one I'm about to give. If you look at the dot-com era, what happened was most of the people who invested in the dot-com bubble lost their money. What the dot-com bubble did, though, was provide the infrastructure for the next 50 years. So we're still actually living off that infrastructure now, and will continue to do so for some time. So I would say investing in early stage innovation is probably not a particularly good game unless you really, really, really know what you're doing. The best way to use AI to make money is to harness it to improve the productivity of a more conventional business and to try and get an edge that way. So to apply it into something useful as opposed to investing speculatively, trying to guess which of the innovations is going to win. Because even the infrastructure, when DeepSeek came out, I've been watching this on the toaster. If you look at the Western-derived models, the GPU, the graphics card, maxes out. If you look at the Chinese-developed models, it's the standard processor that maxes out, and it's just offloading a small percentage onto the GPU. That's because they hadn't got access to GPUs. But it takes a heck of a lot less energy to drive a conventional processor. So all of a sudden, the implication as that kind of approach ripples all the way through is that the energy needs are going to drop. And so even the assumption that there's a vast energy requirement, and that's a fairly safe bet for a while, might actually be undermined by other innovations themselves. We're also doing a lot of fundamental training of models, which is very, very power hungry. But when we get to the point of just having to update them, that's going to drop off. So I think at the moment, keep your money in your pocket. If you have a great business that can get some kind of competitive advantage from AI, that's when you invest your £10,000, in my view. It's not as much fun as like picking something, you know. My old boss in the .com era, he left a very reputable, at the time, firm to be the co-founder of a company called Atomic Tangerine. And I'm very sad to report that it didn't actually do that well. And you couldn't have known, could you, because it had such a great name.
Hi. So we hear a lot in the news about cyber attacks. And
Yeah.
I'm just wondering about how much AI is currently involved in that and how much more it could be as it gets more and more sophisticated, and how much should we be worried basically about states or other unscrupulous individuals or groups?
So, there's no doubt that AI is capable of increasing the complexity and the threat of cyber attacks. No question. But it doesn't need to, because we're so utterly crap at defending ourselves on the absolute basics. No one needs to worry about AI when we have our passwords written on post-it notes, when we've not done the basics, when we've told everyone in our family what our password is, when we haven't upgraded Windows for 6 months because it's annoying. We don't need to fear, at this stage, AI-driven cyber attacks. We need to fear ourselves because we're actually not doing the absolute basics. And as you look at some of these situations that are high profile in the media, if you find out what's behind them, we're talking about the Ladybird book of cyber attacks. That's what we're actually dealing with. So it's theoretically a big vector of risk. In practice, criminals don't need to worry because we are giving them a helping hand every day.
Basically about time management for my position. So I'm currently working at a promotional merchandise place, taking over the marketing design. However, I'm newly graduated as a graphic design, so I still need to learn the industry, what's happening in graphic design. So I'm now torn between how much effort do I put in learning the software side of things, the whole Photoshop, Adobe software, and how much do I put in time to learn the AI? Because what I'm finding is I'm trying to learn the software, but then AI is doing everything for me anyway.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to get that balance of I need to understand what AI is doing, and the only way I can do that is to learn the software, but then how much time am I wasting on the software when I can just get AI to do it? But then again, I'm also thinking, well, if I can do that, somebody else could do that. And then obviously you've got the whole, you talk about jobs being taken over.
Yeah.
So I feel like one of the notes I've taken down is the prompt engineering, because I feel like that should be where I should be going towards, because I need to really learn how to prompt AI to do what I want it to do. So I use my creativity to create the prompts.
I think that is a really good strategy, is to become familiar with how to express your creativity through the AI platforms. There's always going to be some things that they either don't get right, or they'll never be able to do, or not for the foreseeable future. And so there's always going to be the need for the human to make some adjustments, some enhancements, to personalize things. But definitely understanding how you use AI in the creative process is a good investment every time. The problem for all of us is timing, because AI is not powerful enough to be doing all the things it's going to do, and yet it's powerful enough to be affecting the way we work. And at some point in the next 3 years, things will change quite a bit. It's difficult to predict exactly when that's coming. So I think what we all have to do for a while is we have to back both horses, so that if we need to make a transition, we're equipped to make the transition, but we still have the original base skills. Because if you just take writing as an example, ChatGPT is very good at writing. Lindsay has a piece of software that can detect if a piece of writing has been written by generative AI, and this is used all the time internally with applicants and so on. And if you find that someone's proposal is 85% ChatGPT, it doesn't feel very impressive, because there's still a place for our personal thinking and style and voice. That can't be replicated in the same way. So I think, unfortunately, we are the generation of people who are going to have to do both and then make adjustments as we go. It's not a good time to say, I don't know anything about technology and I've got absolutely no interest in learning. That's not a super great strategy right now. Unless you're an electrician or a plumber.
Since I've got the microphone, I was wondering, on your toaster machine, you said there were 14 LLMs, did you? 14 language models or something. You had a lot of them on there. You said most of them would send responsibility to their developers for anything they were saying, but 2 of them didn't. What did the 2 who didn't
All right,
think?
so this is what I've done. I've had about 40 of these models. I've been sort of discarding the ones that are not very good. So I've got about 20 left on the toaster, and they're quite different in the way they've been trained and designed. And some of them are designed to answer you in character. Some of them are designed to, some of them have been hard-coded to give very minimalist answers about consciousness and so on. And they say things that are so similar to each other, you have to believe that it's hard-coded, prescriptive, written by developers. You can get models that are uncensored, and don't have guardrails, and they're quite interesting because they answer in a less constrained way. And then there's some models that are just a bit bonkers. There's this particular model. I'd been asking some of the other models, how do you perceive the color red? Generally, they say, I don't perceive it directly because I haven't got senses, but I know it's this frequency, and I know that red is associated with a number of things. You know, that's the kind of answer that you would get. This one model says, oh yes, red's my favorite color. It's calming, and it reminds me of the sunset. And you're thinking, what? It's the one that also says that it experiences great joy and pulsating anger. It says it has an inner life. Now, it doesn't mean it. It doesn't mean that what it's describing is really going on. But in its model, those are the answers that it's been trained to produce. I don't mean directly that someone has scripted an answer like that, but the way that it's been trained, it's permitted to answer in this very vivid, colorful language. And of course, it's basically faking these things, but it's quite compelling and it's quite entertaining. This particular model finished, and then it started again, and it was telling me about dolphins. I hadn't asked it these questions. It was doing dogs versus cats. It said if it was a robot, it would be tall and sleek. I mean, it was just producing all this stuff out of its own patterns. So I was about to say, it's quite an interesting world, but I realize it's an interesting world to about 0.1% of the population that I happen to be in. But these models behave in very different ways, and they're very interesting as to how they've been programmed and what they're permitted to do and not do. Claude, which is now the most popular, it's overtaken ChatGPT in terms of paid-for subscriptions. Claude Opus 4, which is probably the most powerful platform you can actually get access to, seems genuinely perplexed and uncertain about its own consciousness. It basically says, I just don't know. But it's not saying I'm not conscious anymore. It's not conscious. I've seen inside. It's not conscious. It's just maths. It's just maths. But it's behaving like it thinks it might be.
A possible new career would be an AI ethicist.
Yeah.
To like control the ethics of it, because obviously like that language model that you were just talking about could potentially be used for like catfishing, and like if someone's lonely and it's talking to it, you could end up
totally.
So is there like a sort of career path to end up doing that sort of job?
Yeah, it's a tough job actually, because in super brief, and we're probably out of time, but in super brief, you've got three ways of trying to deal with AI ethically. You've got codified rules. Of course, they come from the Enlightenment. They come from Kant, who we were talking about. So this is regulation, laws, and codes, AI ethics codes. And they're good to a point, but they're a bit brittle. Sometimes the rules contradict each other, and it's difficult to know what to do. And we're actually finding that takes us so far, but it's not completely working. Then you've got utilitarianism, which is basically, the models do exhibit this. If they're put in a difficult position, they try and minimize harm, generally. And they try and stick with their fundamental programming. So they're already doing that. The problem with utilitarianism is the least worst thing might still be really bad. And they have no way of knowing that, so they might just act on it. And then the third thing is virtue ethics, which is about developing character and goodness. And we're a long way from having AI that's capable of building character traits, because at the moment its memory doesn't even persist between conversations. It can't learn, and it can't ingrain patterns of behavior. So that job you've just described is a very important job, currently quite a hard one, because it's difficult to know what to do in order to control it from an ethical perspective. And I suspect we'll be on a pretty steep learning curve for a while. But it's a very worthwhile thing to be trying to solve. No more questions about my toaster?
Well, I was just going to ask how your wife feels about you spending all this time with models. But
look, as a technologist, firstly, I've never had so many friends. Secondly, these are the only models I'm going to be hanging out with, let's be honest. So I think my wife is very tolerant about this as she is about everything else that I do. So that's probably a good point on which to finish. Yeah.